Uh, hello, everybody. I am the Sauntering Spellcaster, sauntering through your mind and other places. And today, I am honored to share with you something that I love: stories. Stories, folk tales, fairy tales, myths, epics. They're a big part of why I made the character that I made. They're a big part of what I happen to enjoy. And I hope that in sharing these stories with you, you may come to enjoy them as well. I've wanted to read the Finn McCool stories for a while now, actually. And a while back, I ordered perhaps one of the most beloved tellings of these stories: The High Deeds of Finn McCool by one Rosemary Sutcliff. Everything I've seen looking into this book has told me that this book is probably going to be something special. You know, the world's full of cool stories and characters. And it's only relatively recently that I've come to see that Ireland has a lot of really cool stories and characters. I've been to Ireland before. It's a beautiful place. I wouldn't mind going back. It honestly was a beautiful experience. A lot of history there. When I went, there was a bus driver. His name was Dennis. He was a super cool guy. He had something interesting to tell us about every place we went. Really cool guy. I have to admit, I kind of wish I knew about these stories back when I went. Because I think it would have been cool talking to Dennis about these characters, these stories. I read through the Timbo Kalani, not on stream, but I'll probably read that one at some point. Because that's also a pretty interesting book. And I have to admit, you know, Cuchulainn has a cool story. I find it fascinating what people continue to do with some of these characters and stories. Finn McCool shows up in Shin Megami Tensei 5. He's actually relevant to the plot, and he's actually a really strong character, too. I think it's really neat what people are able to do with stories, how they continue to be inspired by them. So, without further ado, now that, you know, that's out of the way, that little tangent of mine, how about we start at the beginning? The author's note. If you already know the stories of Cuchulainn and the Red Branch Warriors, you will notice a very great difference between them and the stories of Finn McCool. Both concern the adventures of Irish heroes, their loves and hates, their battles with strange and supernatural beings, yet they belong to two quite different worlds. It seems right and fitting that the Red Branch stories should be set in the wild, harsh countryside of Northern Ireland. They are wild, harsh tales. Their magic is darkly and fiercely splendid. Their people are very real, so that one loves and hates them, and suffers and rejoices with them. They have the quality which we call epic, which means that if we were deciding their right place on the bookshelves, we should put them somewhere alongside Homer's Iliad, which is the greatest epic of all. The stories of Finn McCool belong to a later date and are set in the south, many of them in the soft green Killarney countryside. And this again seems right and fitting. They belong not to epic, but to folklore and fairy tale, and only here and there, as in the fighting for the river ford and the hostel of the quickened trees, something of the hero tale remains. The magic changes and shimmers and shifts on ahead of one, just a little out of reach, like the end of the rainbow. The Donnans, who in the Red Branch stories were still recognizably gods or half-gods, have become the fairy kind, with only a shred of their lost godhood clinging to them here and there. Time means nothing. Oisin, the son of Finn, is a young warrior when his son Osca is a young warrior. And in another way also, time means nothing. For the Lachlan Raiders, whose battles with the Fianna come so often into the stories, are the Vikings, the Norsemen. And the Norsemen did not even begin to be sea raiders, let alone reach the Irish coast, till long after Finn's day. It is just that later stories picked them out of their own time and set them back 500 years or so into Finn's, out of a feeling that the sea raiders were the enemy, and therefore the right people for the Fianna to fight. The stories of the Fianna are full of loose ends and contradictions, and unexplained wisps of strangeness that seem to have drifted in for no especial reason except that they are curious or beautiful and happen to be floating by. They are stories made simply for the delight of story making, and I have retold them in the same spirit, even adding a flicker or a flourish of my own from time to time, as everyone who has retold them in the past 1,000 years or so has done before me. Rosemary Sutcliff. Chapter 1. The Birth and Boyhood of Finn. In the proud and far back days, though not so far back, nor yet so proud as the days of the Red Branch heroes, there rose another mighty brotherhood in Erin, and they were called the Fianna. They were a war host whose task was to hold the shores of Erin safe from invaders, and they were a peace host, for it was their task also to keep down raids and harryings and blood feuds between the 5 lesser kingdoms into which Erin was divided. Ulster, Munster, Connacht, Leinster, and Meath were each their own companies of the Fianna under their own Fiann chiefs. But one captain was over them all, and each and every man must take his oath of loyalty, not to his own king, nor to his own Fiann chief alone, but to the captain and to the high king of Erin himself, sitting in his high hall at Tara with his right foot upon the stone of destiny. The Fianna came to their most full and valiant flowering, and to their greatest power in the time when the hero Finn McCool was their captain, and Cormac MacArt, the grandson of Con the 100 Fighter, was High King of Erin. But the story has its beginning back in the days of Finn's father, Cool Mac Trinmore, lord of the Clan Bosna of Leinster, who was captain before him, and of Ide Mac Morna, lord of the Clan Morna, and the chief of the Connacht Fianna, who sought the captaincy for himself. At Nucha, near where Dublin stands today, a great and bloody battle was fought between Clan Bosna and Clan Morna, and two bulls battle for the lordship of the herd, and one of Cool's household warriors wounded Ide in the eye so sorely that he went by the name of Goal, which means one-eyed, ever after. But this Ide, who was now Goal MacMorna, dealt Cool MacTrinmore a still fiercer blow that cost him not the sight of an eye, but life itself. And he took from Cool's belt a certain bag of blue and crimson dyed crane skin that was the treasure bag of the Fianna. And with the death of Cool and the loss of the treasure bag, the battle went against Clan Basna, and there was a great slaughter, and those that were left of the Leinster Fianna, including Criminal, the brother of Cool, as well as the Munster men who had stood with them, were driven into exile in the Connacht Hills. And there was blood feud between Clan Basna and Clan Morna from that day, which was to bring back sorrow upon Erin in the end. News of the battle and of Cool's death was brought to his young wife, Myrna of the White Neck, and she near her time to bear his child. And Myrna, knowing that her lord's enemies would not allow any child of his to live after him if they could help it, fled, taking two of her most trusted women with her into the wild fastness of Sleeve Bloom. And there, like a hind lying upon the fern in the white thorn month, when the fawns are brought into the world, she bore a man-child, and not daring to keep him with her for fear of the hunters of her trail, she called him Dimna, and gave him to the two women, bidding them bring him up in the hidden glens of Sleeve Bloom, until he was of an age to fight for his rightful place as Cool's son. Then, sadly, she went her way alone, and no more is known of her, save that at last, after many wanderings, she found shelter with a chieftain of Kerry. In the hidden glens of Sleeve Bloom, Dimna grew from a babe into a child, and from a child into a boy. And the women trained him in all the ways of the wild, so that by the time he was a youth, he was such a hunter that he could bring a flying bird out of the sky with one cast of a sling stone, and run down the deer on his naked feet without even a hound to help him. And he knew the ways of wolf and otter, badger and fox, and falcon, as good a hound master knows the way of his own dogs. As he grew older, he began to range far and wide from the turf bothy that was all the home he knew. And so one day he came to the hall of a great chieftain, before which some boys of his own age were playing hurley. The game looked to him good, and he asked if he might join in. And they gave him a hurley stick and told him the rules. And soon as he got into the way of it, he could play better than any of them, even taking the ball from their best and swiftest player. The next day he played with them again, and though they divided the team so that a fourth of all their number were set to play against him, he won the game. The day after, it was half their number, and the day after that, their whole number played against him. But he won those games too. That evening in the hall, the boys told the chieftain of the strange boy who had joined them and beaten their whole double team at hurley. "And what is he like, this boy?" asked the chieftain. "And what is his name?" "We do not know his name," said the leader among the boys. "But he is tall and strong, and the hair of him is bright as barley when it whitens in the sun of harvest time." "If he is as fair as that, then there's only one name for him," said the chieftain, "and that is Finn. And Finn, which means fair, he became from that day forward." The chieftain talked to the strange boy, to a friend who passed that way on the hunting trail and lodged under his roof for the night. And the friend spoke of him to another, and so as time went by, rumors of his skill and daring spread like ripples on a pool when a stone is tossed into the water, and they came to the ears of Gol MacMorna, and it seemed to Gol that if Cool had a son, he would be just such a one as this Finn. Myrna of the White Neck had been heavy with child when she fled to the wilds. What if the child had been safely born and was a son? The boy would be 14 by now, just coming to manhood. Gol MacMorna smelled danger. He mustered the Connacht Fianna and bade them hunt the boy down. They were great hunters as well as great warriors, the Fianna, and bring him back, living or dead. But one of Finn's two foster mothers was a wise woman, and she saw in a pool of black bog water, in the cupped palms of her hands, how the Fianna of Connacht were hunting the hills for him, and she told the other woman, and together they spoke to Finn. The hunt is out for you, fosterling. Gol MacMorna has heard more of you than is for your own good, and his men are questing through the woods to kill you. For you and not Gol are by rights the captain of the Fianna of Erin. Therefore, the time has come for you to leave this glen. Then Finn took his spear which they gave him, and sling and his warmest cloak, and set out on his wanderings. To and fro and up and down the length and breadth of Erin he wandered, taking service with now this king or chieftain, and now that, and so getting his weapons skill and his warrior training against the day when he should stand out into the open and fight for his rightful place in the world. He began to gather to him a band of young men of much his own kind, fierce and gay and daring, and when he felt that the time was come, he led them into Connacht to seek out any of his father's old followers who might yet be living in the hills. The day after they crossed the Connacht border, they came upon a woman, bowed altogether with grief, and keening over the body of a young man, outstretched and stained on trampled grass. Finn stopped when he saw her, and asked, "What ill thing has happened here?" She looked at him, and her grief was so terrible that the tears falling from her eyes were great drops of blood. "Here is my son Glonda, my only son, dead, slain by Leah of Lucair and his followers. If you are a warrior as you seem, go now and avenge his death, since I have no other man to avenge it." So Finn went after this Leah of Lucair, and found him, and slew him in single combat, the followers of both standing by. And when Leah lay dead, Finn saw that a strange-seeming bag of crane skin, dyed blue and crimson, was fastened to his belt. He knelt and untied the belt thong, and opened the bag. Inside was a spearhead of fine, dark blue iron, and a war cap inlaid with silver, a shield with bronze studs around the rim, and a gold-clasped boar's hide belt. Finn had no knowledge as to why the man should be carrying these things, but they looked worth the keeping, so he put them in the bag and tied the thong to his own belt, and he and his companions went on their way. Beyond the Shannon, in the shadowed depths of the Connacht forest, he came upon a clearing in the woods, and in the clearing a cluster of branch-woven bothies. And as he looked out from the low door holes, one after another came, old men, gaunt as wolves in a famine winter, bent and white-haired and half-clad in animal skins and rags of old once brilliant cloth. But each man carried in his hand an ancient sword or spear, for it seemed to them that the strange comers could only be young warriors of the clan Morna, who had discovered their refuge at last, and they chose to meet their deaths fighting, rather than go down tamely without a blow. And something about their bearing and the way they handled their weapons, even now, told Finn that they were the men he had come to seek. And he could have howled like a dead man's dog, thinking of the tall and splendid warriors that they had been on the morning that they stood out to fight at Nucha. Then he swallowed the grief in him and cried out to them with joy, "You are Clan Basna! Which of you is Criminal, the brother of Cool?" Then one of the old men stepped forward, sword in hand, and he, not yet knowing whether or no he faced Clan Morna, and said fearlessly, "I am Criminal, the brother of Cool." Finn looked in his old tired eyes and said, "I am Finn, the son of Cool," and he knelt and laid the crane skin bag at the old man's feet for a gift, since he had nothing else to give. Criminal looked at the bag, and cried out in a great voice to come from such a thin and bent old body, "The treasure bag of the Fianna! Brothers, the time of our waiting is over!" He opened the bag, and one by one drew out the things that it contained. The old men and the young men standing round to watch, and it seemed to Finn that the eyes of the old men grew brighter, and their backs straighter, and the grip of their weapon hands stronger with each object that appeared, the spearhead and the warcap, the shield and the boar's hide belt. Gall Mac Morna took this from your father's body after the slaying, and for 18 years it has been lost to us. Now it returns again to Clan Basna, and with it will return also the lordship of the Fianna. Go you, and take your father's place, for it is yours, Finn McCool." "Keep the treasure bag for me then," said Finn. "My comrades I leave with you, to guard both it and you, until I send you word to bring it out for me." And again he went his way, alone as the first time. But he knew that there was yet one more thing he had to learn before he was fitted to take his father's place. And he went to study poetry and the tales in which lay the ancient wisdom and history of his people, with a certain druid by the name of Finnegas, who lived on the banks of the river Boyne. 7 years Finnegas had lived beside the Boyne, and all that while he had been striving by every means that he could think of to catch Fintan, the Salmon of Knowledge, who lived in a dark pool of the river, where a great hazel tree bent its branches and dropped nuts of knowledge into the water. Fintan ate the nuts as they fell, and their power passed into him, and whoever ate of Fintan would progress the wisdom of all the ages. In 7 years, a man, and he a druid, may think of many ways to catch a salmon, but Fintan the Salmon of Knowledge had escaped them all, until Finn came treading lightly through the woods to be the old man's pupil. Soon after that, Finnegas caught the salmon quite easily, and as though it had been simply waiting its own chosen time to be caught. Finnegas gave the salmon to Finn to cook for him, and look that you eat nothing of the creature, not the smallest mouthful yourself, but bring it to me as soon as it is ready, for it's wearying I've been for the taste of it this 7 long years past. Then he sat him down in the doorway of his bothy and waited. And a long wait it seemed to him. At last Finn brought the salmon, steaming on a long dish of polished maple wood. But as he sat it down again, Finnegas looked into his face and saw there was a change in it, and that it was no longer the face of a boy, and he asked, "Have you eaten any of the salmon in spite of my words to you?" And Finn shook his head. "I have not. But when I turned it on the spit, I scorched my thumb, and I sucked it to ease the smart. Was there any harm in that, my master?" Finnegas sighed a deep and heavy sigh, and pushed the dish away. "Take the rest of the salmon and eat it. For already in the hot juice on your thumb, you have had all the knowledge and power that was in it. And in you, and not in me, as I had hoped. The prophecy is fulfilled. And when you have eaten, go from here, for there is nothing more that I can teach you." From that day forward, whenever Finn wished to know how some future thing would turn out, or in the meaning of some mystery, or to gain tidings of events happening at a distance, he had only to put his scorched thumb between his teeth, and the knowledge would come to him as though it were the second sight. And another power came to him also at that time, so that he could save the life of any sick or wounded man, no matter how near to death, by giving him a drink of water from his cupped hands. Chapter 2. How Finn won his father's place. Now when he left his druid master beside the Boyne, Finn knew that the time was fully come for him to be claiming his father's place, and he set out for Tara of the High Kings. It was Samhain, the time of the great autumn feast, and as he grew nearer, his road, and the 4 other roads that met at Tara, became more and more densely thronged with chiefs and warriors, on horseback or in chariots, decorated with bronze and walrus ivory, with their women in gowns of green and saffron and crimson and heather dark plaid, and their golden apple, and the golden apples swinging from the ends of their braided hair, and their tall feather-heeled hounds running alongside. For at Samhain all the kings and chief of Erin came together, and all men were free to sit at the table in the High King's Hall, if they could find room, and so long as they left their weapons outside. So up the royal hill, and in through the gate, and across the broad forecourt went Finn, amid the incoming throng, and sat himself down with the king's household warriors, ate badger's meat baked with salt and honey, and drank the yellow mead from a silver-bound oxhorn, and watched the High King and the tall, scarred man close beside him, who he knew from the lack of an eye must be Gall MacMorna, and waited for the king to notice that there was a stranger among his warriors. And presently the High King did notice him, and sent one of his court officials to bid him come and stand before the high table. "What is your name? And why do you come and seat yourself unannounced among my household warriors?" demanded the king. And Finn flung up his pale bright head and gave him back stare for stare. I am Finn, the son of Cool, who was once captain of all the Fianna of Erin, Cormac, High King, and I come to carry my spear in your service as he did. But for me, I will carry it in the ranks of your household warriors, and not with the Fianna. This he said because he knew that to join the Fianna, he would have to swear faith to Gall MacMorna, and he was no light faith breaker. If you are the son of Cool, then you may be proud of your birth, said the king. Your father was a mighty hero, and his spear I trusted as I would trust my own, and as I will trust yours. Then Finn swore faith to Cormac the High King, and Cormac gave him a place among his household warriors, and the feasting went on as it had done before, and the king's harper beat upon his curved harp, while the mead horns passed from hand to hand, and the great hounds fought over the bones among the rushes on the floor. But little by little, the drink began to pass more slowly. The laughter grew fitful, and the harp song fell away, and men began to half glance into each other's eyes and break off the glance quickly, as though afraid of what they might see. And indeed they had good reason. Every Samhain for the past 20 years, Tara had been weirdly and terribly visited. Fiend or fairy, no one knew. What the strange corner was, only that his name was Island of the Flaming Breath, and that every Samhain at midnight he came upon them from the fairy hill close by, and burned the royal dun over their heads. No use for any warrior, however valiant, to try and withstand him, for he carried a silver harp, and as he came he drew from its strings the sweetest and most drowsy music that ever breathed upon the ears of men, and all who heard it drifted into a deep, enchanted sleep. So each Samhain it was the same, and he came upon Tara with no one left awake to withstand him, and he breathed where he would with a licking breath of fire, until thatch and timber blackened and scorched and twisted and kindled into leaping flame. So every year Tara must be rebuilt, and every year again, and yet again. When the sounds of feasting had died quite away, and an uneasy hush with little stirrings and little eddies in it held the king's hall, Cormac rose in his high place, and offered a mighty reward in gold and horses and women's slaves to any warrior who could prevail against Island of the Flaming Breath, and keep the thatch on Tara till the next day's dawn. He had made the same offer, and his father before him 20 Samhain nights, and after the first few times, no man, not the boldest of his warriors, had come forward in answer, for they knew that neither courage nor skill nor strength would avail them against the wicked silvery music. So Cormac made the offer and waited, without hope. And then Finn rose in his place, and stood to face the troubled king. Cormac MacArt, High King of Erin, I will forego the gold and the horses and the women slaves. But if I prevail against this horror of the night, and keep the thatch on Tara till tomorrow's dawn, will you swear before all these in your hall to give me my rightful heritage? It is a bold man, I'm thinking, who seeks to bargain with the High King, said Cormac. What heritage is that? The captaincy of the Fianna of Erin. I have given you the place that you asked for among my own warriors, said Cormac. And is that not good enough for you? Not if I keep the tatch on Tara, said Finn. Then a murmur ran around the hall, and men looked at each other and at Gull MacMorna, who sat looking straight before him with his one bright falcon's eye. I swear, said the king, and let all those gathered here, the kings and chiefs of Erin, warriors of my household and of all the Fianna, witness to my swearing. If you overcome Island of the Flaming Breath, you will have earned the captaincy in your own right, and in your own right, as well as by heritage, you shall hold it. So Finn left the king's hall, and took up his spear that he had laid by when he entered, and went up to the rampart walk that crested the encircling turf wall. He did not know at all how he would succeed when so many had failed before him, but his faith was in his destiny, and he did not doubt that he would prevail. And while he paced to and fro, waiting and watching, and listening more than all, one of the older warriors came after him, carrying a spear with its head laced into a leather sheath. Long ago your father saved my life, said the man, and now is the time to be repaying my debt. Take the spear to aid you in your fight. I have a good spear of my own, Finn said, but the other shook his head. Not such a spear as this. That must be kept hooded like a hawk, lest it run wild and drink blood of its own accord. It was forged by Lean, the smith of the gods, and he beat into it the fire of the sun and the potency of the moon. When you hear the first breath of the fairy music, lay the blade to your forehead, and the fierceness and the bloodlust in it will drive away all sleep from you. Take it! Finn took the spear and loosed the thongs and slipped off the cover. He saw a spearhead of iron as sheeny blue as the moonlight, and studded with 30 rivets of bright Arabian gold. Take it, said the man once more. And Finn hooded the spear again, but left the thongs loose, and carrying it, he returned to his pacing up and down, looking always out over the plains of Mead, white under the moon, and listening, until the silence in his own ears sounded loud as the hushing of the sea in a shell. And then it came, the faintest gossamer shimmer of distant harp music, nearer and clearer, even as he checked to listen, clearer and nearer. The fairy music lapped like the first gentle wavelets of sleep around him. It was the light summer wind through the moorland grasses of sleeve bloom. It was the murmur of bees among the sun-warmed bell heather. It was all the lullabies that ever his foster mothers had sung to him when he was too young to remember. Finn tore himself free of the enchantment that was weaving itself around him, and with his fingers that seemed weak and numb, dragged the leather hood from the spear and pressed the blade to his forehead. Instantly he heard the voice of the spear more clearly than the voice of Island's harp, an angry hornet note that drove all sleep away from him. His head cleared, and looking at once more towards the fairy hill, he saw a thing like a mist wraith floating towards him along the ground. nearer and nearer, taking shape and substance as it came, until Finn was looking at the pale, airy shape of Aelin of the Flaming Breath, so clear now that he could even catch the silver ripple of the heartstrings on which the thing played with long white fingers as he came. Now Aelin had reached the stockade which crowned the turf walls, and a long tongue of greenish flame shot from his mouth and lapped at the timbers. Finn tore off his mantle of saffron-dyed ramskins, and with one sweep of it beat the flame into the ground. With his flame beaten out, Aelin gave a terrible wailing cry, and turned over and back, streaming through himself like a wave flung back by a rocky shore, and fled away towards the fairy hill. But Finn, with his hornet shouting of the spear loud and urgent in his ears, leapt the stockade and was after him, as swift as he. The doorway of the fairy hill stood open, letting out a green twilight, and as Aelin fled wailing towards it, Finn made one mighty cast with the spear, and the spear flew on its way rejoicing, and passed through the creature's body and out the other side. And there on the threshold of the fairy hill, or where the threshold had been, for now the door was gone, and only the frost-crisped grass and brambles gleamed faintly under the moon, Aelin of the Flaming Breath lay dead. Like a heap of thistle down and touchwood, and the fungus that grows on the north side of trees, tangled together into somewhat the shape of a man. Then Finn cut off the head and set it on the point of his spear, and carried it back to Tara, and set it up on the walls for all to see. When morning came, and Tara still stood as it had stood last night, all men knew that Finn must have prevailed against Aelin of the Flaming Breath, and led by the High King, they went out of their ramparts, and there they found Finn leaning wearily on the stockade, and waiting for their coming, and nothing to show for the happenings of the night but the scorch marks of his saffron cloak, which he had wrapped close about himself against the dawn chill, and the strange and ghastly head upreared on his spear point against the morning sky. "I have kept the thatch on Tara," Finn said. Then Cormac MacArt set his arms across the young man's shoulders, and turned with him to face the mighty gathering of the court. "Chiefs and kings and warriors, last night ye bore witness when I swore in the mead hall that if this Finn, son of Cool, should prevail against Aelin of the Flaming Breath, I would set him in his father's place as captain of the Fianna of Erin. Last night, it was in my mind that it was small chance he had, where so many had failed before. But he has prevailed. He has slain the fire fiend enslaved Tara, and therefore I give him to you of the Fianna for your captain, according to my word and yours. Any of you that will not serve under him, let you leave Erin freely and without disgrace. There are other war bands and kings, bodyguards overseas in other lands." He turned to the tall, one-eyed man who stood out before the rest. "That is for you also, Gol MacMorna. For you who have been the Fionn captain these 18 years past, will you strike hands with Finn McCool and lead the Connacht Fianna under him? Or will you cross the sea and carry your sword into the service of another king? I will strike hands with Finn, the son of Cool, my old enemy, said Gol McMorna, though the words stuck a little in his throat, and he and Finn spat in their palms and struck hands like two men sealing a bargain. No man went out from the High King's forecourt to carry his sword overseas, and the feud between Clan Morna and Clan Bosna, though it was not healed, was skinned over, and remained so for many years to come. So Finn McCool became captain of the Fianna of Erin, as his father had been before him. Chapter 3. Finn and the Fianna. It is time to tell something of the Fianna and the life they lived. In peace times it was like this. In winter they went to their own homes, or assembled in the halls of some greater chieftain. And in the summer they gathered for training, whole battalions of them living together in the open, sleeping in the branch-woven cabins if they slept under cover at all, or out on the bare mountainsides with no cover but their cloaks between themselves and the grey dew, and living off the land wherever they might be. The hunting was rich, for in those days much of Erin was fleeced with forest, and in the forest ran boar and wolf and red deer. The Fianna were famous as hunters as well as warriors, sometimes on horseback, sometimes on foot. They hunted with their great wolfhounds, who stood as tall as the shoulder as a yearling colt, and the hounds were not more fleet-footed than their masters. It was said that in a single day's chase they could hunt from Killarney and Kerry to Ben Aider near the east coast, climbing the mountains and cutting across the trackless bogs with no more thought of a check or a way round than if they had been the wild hunt itself. Finn's boyhood among the wild glens of Slieve Bloom had fitted him for this life as no other kind of boyhood could have done. He knew the ways of the furred and feathered things. He could make the cry of a dog fox so truly that a vixen could answer him. He could move through the forest with no more sound than a shadow makes in moving. Many, very many, years after his death, his son Oisin, who was a poet and a harper, as well as one of the greatest of his warriors, told of him in a song that Finn's favorite music was the babble of a wild duck on the Lake of Three Narrows, the scolding talk of the blackbird of Derry Cairn, the cattle lowing in the glen of the thrushes. And again in another song, these are the sounds that were dear to Finn, the din of battle, the banquet's glee, the bay of his hounds through the Loughrin's ringing, and the blackbird singing in Letter Lee, the shingle grinding above the shore, when they dragged his warboats down to the sea, the dawn wind whistling his spears among, and the magic song of his minstrels three. Many things were told of Finn by the warriors who served under him, for he was such a captain as men will tell of to their grandsons, and their grandsons' grandsons pass on the tale. It was told of him that his sense of justice was so sure and so unbreakable that if he had to give judgment in a quarrel between a stranger and his own son, he would be as fair to the stranger as to his son, and as fair to his son as to the stranger. It was told of him that he was so generous that if the leaves falling from the tree in autumn were gold, and the foam of the salt sea waves was silver, Finn would give it all away to any who asked him. It was told of him also that he had another side, a dark of the moon side, and he could forgive an injury, laughing, but knew also how to nurse an old hate through the years to the death of the man he hated. This was the new captain of the Fianna of Erin, with nothing yet told of him at all save his wild boyhood deeds, and that he had overcome Eileen of the Flaming Dress, and that he was the son of Cool MacTrimmer. And now Finn McCool must have a living place, a great hall and strong points where he could gather his chief warriors about him. So Cormac the High King gave him the strong Dun of Almu in Kildare. Today the place is called the Hill of Allen, and there is nothing to be seen there but the wave-lipped traces of encircling turf banks under the heather and bramble domes, no sound but the wind blowing over and the green plover crying. But when Finn was its lord, the hill was circled by massive walls of turf and timber, gleaming white with lime wash, and halls standing high and mighty above the byres and barns and chariot sheds and the sleeping places of warriors, and the weapons stood tall in the forecourt, and many proud chiefs and champions sharpened their weapons on it in time of war. Of these champions, the kin and the hearth companions of Finn McCool, the foremost and hardest fighter, despite his one eye, was his old enemy, Golmac Morna, a hero savage as a wild boar to his foes, staunch and faithful to his friends. Then also there was Conan, son of that lord of Lucaire, whom Finn had slain with the treasure bag of Fianna upon him, and who, for 7 years after his father's death, was an outlaw, raiding against the Fianna, slaying here a man and there a war dog, firing the thatch of a chieftain's hall. Conan MacLea stole at last upon Finn himself when he chanced to be alone upon a day's hunting, and flung his arms round him from behind in a grip so strong that it could hold even the Fionn captain fast and motionless. Finn knew that there was only one man in Erin strong enough to do that, and he said, "What do you want of me, Conan MacLea?" "To swear fealty to you, and carry my spear among the Fianna, for I am weary of playing wolf on your flanks." So Finn laughed and said, "As you will, Conan MacLea. Let you keep your faith with me, and I will keep mine with you." So Conan swore fealty and served loyally with the Fianna for 30 years. Then there was another, Conan of the clan Morna, and a fat man growing bald, no great fighter, but great at belittling other men's deeds. No man had such liking for Conan Mchumail, but Finn kept with him because he had a hard core of common sense, and his advice was often worth listening to. It was told that when he was stripped, he showed a black ram's fleece down his back instead of human skin, and this is the way he came by it. One day, when Conan and some others of the Fianna were out hunting, they came upon a stately dun, with walls limed washed as white as a war shield, and roofs of many-colored thatch. And, being hungry and weary, they entered in search of hospitality. They found themselves in a chieftain's hall with silken hangings, and pillars of cedar wood holding the roof. There was no sign of any living creature, man, woman, child, or hound. But in the midst of the hall a table was set for a feast, with boar's flesh and venison, yew wood vats of crimson foreign wine, and drinking cups of gold and silver. They set themselves down to eat and drink, stretching weary legs beneath the table, and cheerful as groomsmen at a wedding feast. But midway through the meal, one of them sprang to his feet with a startled cry of warning. And as the rest looked up, they saw the place changing around them. The walls to rough wattle, the fine thatched roof with its painted rafters to smoke-blackened turf, such as might cover a hensman's bothy. "Enchantments!" someone cried out, and they all sprang to their feet, making for the doorway, which was shrinking to be no bigger than the mouth of a fox's earth. But Conan was still so busy with the food and drink that he noticed nothing of this until they shouted to him. And then, when he woke at last to his danger and tried to rise and follow, he found himself stuck to his chair like a bird caught in lime. Terrified now, he howled to them for help, and two of them rushed back and seized him by an arm each and pulled him with all their might. They tore him free, but in parting from his chair, he left behind the better part of his tunic and breeks and all the skin of his back and hams. They hauled him through the harrowing doorway and laid him face down outside, wailing like a banshee with the pain of his hurts. Then, for they could think of nothing else to do for him, they bought a black ram from a man herding his flock on the next hill, killed and flayed it, and clapped the skin upon Conan's raw back. And there it took root and grew, and it was with him to the day of his death. Another of the Fianna was Capitan Mac Ronan, famous for his fleetness of foot. It was himself that ran down and slew a wild boar, which the Fianna had hunted for years without being able to touch so much as a bristle of its ugly hide. He had the gift of minstrelsy, and there were few whom the Fianna liked better to listen to after supper, when the mead jars went round and it was time to wake the music of the harp. Unless, of course, it was Oisin, in later years, for there was never much a harper to touch Oisin. He could play and sing the very larks out of the blue sky. There was Legan Lumina, Legan the Leaper, who could overtake the west wind and leap across Tara from side to side with the lightness of heart was on him, and Fergus Finval, who was among the wisest of Finn's counselors. And there was Daring, son of Dobar Obasna, who could tell by shutting his eyes and looking into the darkness at the back of his head what things were happening at a distance, or would happen at a future time. There was Diarmid O'Dina, who was brave and gentle, and so fair to look upon that a few women could look and not fall in love with him. And there were the few old warriors from the Connacht woods and their young bodyguard, who came with the treasure bag of Fianna. The old warriors were past their fighting days, but they sat beside the fire at Almu in winter, and in the sun before the hall door in summer, and plagued the young ones with their counsel. And in the later days, when Finn himself was growing old, there was Osca, Oisin's son, the bravest of the brave, who seemed born and bred for fighting and for nothing else, but a loyal and loving friend to one man, and that man, Diarmid O'Dina. For Diarmid's sake there came bad blood between himself and Finn in the last years of all. Yet another of the things told of Finn was that he wept only twice in all his life, and once was for the death of Bran, his favorite hound, and once was for the death of Osca. Then again were the greatest and most famous of the champions who followed Finn McCool. But there were many and many more whose names have been forgotten, For indeed the Fianna of Erin was more than 3,000 strong, and scarce a day went by that a man did not come seeking to join it. Strange men, some of them, with strange stories at their backs, such as the three young warriors with the great hound. The hound had this power that by breathing on water he could change it into wine or mead, whichever was demanded, and his three masters made the condition, on joining the Fianna, that they should always sleep apart from the rest of the camp. And when Finn inquired why this might be, the young leader among them then explained, "Every night one of us three must die, and the other two was watched beside him till he returned to life at sunrise. Therefore we would be undisturbed in our watching." It was not easy to join the Fianna, and many tried and failed, for Finn ruled that no man should become one of the proud brotherhood without passing many tests. A warrior must be skillful as well as brave, and to prove his skill, the young man who wished to join their number must first, with only a shield and hazel rod, defend himself against 9 men posted all around him while standing in a hole in the ground so that he could not move from the hips down. If one of the spears they cast at him so much as grazed his skin or drew one drop of blood, he was not taken. Then his hair was plaited into a score of braids, and he was hunted through the woods by others of the Fianna, and if he was wounded or run down, if his spear trembled in his hand, or a single strand of hair broke loose from his braiding, or if a dry twig cracked under his running foot, he was not taken. Then he must leap over a branch set at his own height above the ground and run under another set level with his knee. And still running, he must pull a thorn out of his foot without slackening speed. If he passed all these tests, he must still know the 12 books of poetry and be able to recite long passages from them. And he must have by heart a score or more of the ancient tales in which was hidden the secret lore of the history of Erin. And if he could do all these things, he was taken. Then Finn would bind him by oath never to take a dowry with a wife, never to take another man's cattle by raider's right, unless in vengeance for a wrong, never to refuse help to any man, and never, however hard pressed, to fall back in combat before less than 9 warriors. And then at last the newcomer would swear fealty to the High King of Erin and to Finn McCool as captain, and after that he took his place among the Fianna. And so it was in the time of Finn, the Fianna came to its full greatness, a greatness which it had never had before, and with the death of Finn, its greatness passed away. Ooh. Chapter 4. Finn and the young children. Finn and the young heroes' children. This story and the one that follows it tell how Finn McCool came by the 2 hounds that were his favorites among all his hunting dogs, and it starts in this way. Finn and some of his companions were out hunting among the seawards hills of Argyll. In those days, Argyll was close kin to Erin, and many of the great chiefs hunted on both sides of the water. They had killed and were resting in the warm, honey-smelling heather that crept right down to the rocky shore where the little waves of fine weather came in from the west to cream upon the gull-gray shingle. And as they crawled out their ease, Gull McMorna, whose one eye was better than most men's 2, said to them suddenly, "Look there!" And they looked where his finger pointed out to sea. They saw a dark fleck on the brilliant brightness of the water that became a nutshell boat. That became at last a fine war galley pulling into shore. The men with Finn caught up their hunting spears at the sight, but Finn said, now, let you wait. Every stranger is not an enemy, and there are no war shields hung along the sides of the galley. The boat grounded on the shingle, and the tall man at the steering oar sprang overboard. And leaving the rowers to run her farther up the breach, he turned his face to the land and came striding up through the salt-burned heather to where Finn and his companions stood waiting for his coming. He was tall and finely dressed, with strings of coral and twisted silver about his neck. But his eyes under his golden brown were dark with trouble as they moved from one to another of the Fionn hunters until they found and rested upon Finn. You are Finn McCool, the Lord of the Fianna, he said. I am so, said Finn. What is it that brings you seeking me? I come asking you to help to save my child, for without it I shall lose the small one as I have lost 2 sons before. And how did this grief come upon you? And what thing can I be doing about it? As to both these questions, they can wait. Believe only, for it is true, that you and only you can save this 3rd child for me and my wife. And how if I refuse to go on this blind errand? Finn said. Then I lay this geas upon you, that before you eat or drink or sleep, you follow me. And the stranger, said the stranger, and turning, he strode away from the shore. His crew saw him coming, and before he reached it, they had run the war boat down in the shallows once more. He sprang in, the rowers after him. They bent to their oars, and their galley drew away from the shore, becoming first a nutshell boat, then a splinter of darkness far out on the bright water, then gone as though it had never been. And Finn turned from looking after it and said, Since I may neither eat nor drink nor sleep until I follow, it is in my mind that now I had best be following. We will come with you, said his companions, but Finn refused and bade them carry the kill back to the hunting camp. And he went down to the shore alone. Among the rocks and the spray-wet shingle, he met 7 men who might almost have been waiting for him. Greetings to you, Finn McCool, said the first. The sun and the moon on your path. Is there a service that we can be doing you? Greetings to you, said Finn McCool. What things can you do best in all the world? I am a shipwright, said the man. How good a shipwright are you? With 3 strokes of my axe I can fell the alder tree that grows yonder where the stream comes down, and cut it into planks and build a ship of them. That is a good skill, said Finn, and he turned to the second man. What can you do best in all the world? I am a tracker, said the man. I can track the wild duck over the 9 waves in 9 days. And you? Said Finn to the third man. What can you do best? I am a gripper. When I grip, I never let go until my arms tear their roots out of my shoulders as the thing I have in my grip comes to me. And what is your skill? Said Finn to the fourth man. I am a climber. I can climb a single thread of silk whose other end is fastened to the third star of Orion's belt. And yours, said Finn to the fifth man. I am a thief. I can steal a heron's egg from the nest while the mother bird stands by and watches. And yours, said Finn to the sixth man. I'm a listener. I can hear what people whisper to each other, lip to ear, at the other end of the world. And yours, said Finn McCool to the seventh man, the last man of all. I am a marksman. I can pierce an egg thrown into the sky as far as the strongest bow can send an arrow. Then indeed you can be of service to me, said Finn McCool, and gave each man his orders. So the shipwright felled the elder tree and cut it into planks and built a ship with 3 blows of his axe. And they ran it down into the shallows. And Finn took the steering oar, for that was always the place of the leader. And the tracker went and stood in the bow to guide them in the wake of the other vessel that nobody else could see or smell. And the rest pulled at the oars and helped with the square sail. They sped through the water with the speed of one of Manannan the sea god's white-maned horses. And at sunset they came to land. They ran their ship up on the shingle, where the stranger chief's warboat already lay at rest, and made towards the place, far up the glen that opened to the part of the shore where they could see hearth smoke rising among the hazel and alder woods. They came to a fine house in the clearing, with a level green all about it, and out strode the young hero to greet them, and flung his arms about Finn's shoulders. So you are come! I was hungry and thirsty. Also presently I shall wish to sleep, said Finn, with the laughter hooking up the corners of his mouth. Eat and drink now, said the young hero. Sleep must wait a while. And with his arms still across Finn's shoulders, he led them into his hall, and sat them down to their noble supper, which his people had brought in on charges as broad as so many war shields, and set before them. And while they ate roast boar and salmon, and drank heather-tasting yellow mead, he told Finn why he had brought him there. 7 years ago, I paid the bride price for a maiden whom my heart sang to, and brought her home from her father's hearth to mine. A year later to the day, she bore me a son, and I thought myself the most happy man on earth, until that same night a great hand came down through the chimney hole and snatched the babe from his mother's side. 3 years ago this very night, my wife bore me another son, but again the hand came down through the chimney hole, a great black hand gnarled like a tree root, and snatched that babe from us also. And now tonight my wife lays in the women's quarters, with her time come to bear a third. That is the reason I came seeking your aid, and laid you under a geas to follow me before you should eat or drink or sleep. This is an ill story, said Finn. But if it can be done, I and my men will surely save this third babe for you. Take me now to the women's quarters, and let my men sleep close outside. So the young hero led them to the women's quarters behind the hall, where his wife lay under a coverlid of fine embroidered crimson cloth, with all the women of the household busy about her. And Finn went in and sat himself down by the hearth to watch, while his men lay close outside. And whenever he felt sleep drawing near, He drove his hand against the sharp edge of the iron bar from which his cauldron hung, and so kept wakeful with his wits about him. At midnight the child was born, and hardly had the women helpers cried out that it was a son, than a great black hand, gnarled as a tree root, came down through the chimney hole, and reached out to snatch the tiny squalling thing. Then Finn called to the gripper, and the gripper seized hold of the hand and wrestled with it. He was shaken to and fro as a rat is shaken by a dog, but his grip never slackened, until a howl of rage and agony burst upon them from overhead, and down through the chimney hole crashed the great black arm, torn out by the roots from its owner's shoulder. But quick as the strike of a snake, the other hand came down after it, and snatched up the babe, and was gone. Grief and wailing rose in the young hero's house, and all the people looked at Finn as men looked on one who has failed them. Then Finn swore a great oath. Before dawn, myself and my men will be on the trail of this hand, and if we do not bring your son safe back to you, may none of us ever return to our own hearths again. They went down to the shore once more, and ran their ship down into the shallows and sprang on board. And once again Finn went to the stern and took the steering oar, and the trackers went to the bow and stood there sniffing like a hound, and said, "This way and no other. The track runs through the water." And Finn steered as the tracker bade him. All the day they followed the wave trail as the trackers sniffed it out, and just at sunset they saw far ahead of them a dark speck on the water that was too small for an island and too large for a gull. As they drew nearer, they saw by the last rays of the sun and the first rays of the moon that it was a tower rising sheer out of the water, and the roof of it shining darkly silver over all. They rowed towards it until the galley touched against the walls. Then, while the others rested their oars, the climber set one foot on the gunwale and the other on the wall of the tower, and walked up it as though he had been a fly. In a while he came back and dropped into the waiting boat. "Well?" said Finn. "Well enough," said the climber. "The roof of this tower is made of eel skins, on which a man must be slipping and sliding at every step. Otherwise I would have been back sooner." "You're back now," said Finn. "Well, where do you bring with you?" "I reached the smoke hole in the crest of the roof, and I looked down through it. And below me I saw the giant laying on his bed with a silk coverlet over him and a satin sheet under him, his left shoulder swathed in bloody linen, but the babe asleep in his outstretched right hand. On the floor of the chamber 2 young boys were playing shinty with golden sticks and a silver ball, and beside the hearth a wolfhound bitch lay suckling 2 pups, one gray and one brindled. "Well, indeed," said Finn. "Now it is the turn of the thief. But you must go up again, carrying him on your back, for no one save yourself could climb these sheer walls and a roof as slippery as moonshine." So the climber went up again, carrying the thief on his back. And it was more than once they went, and brought away everything that was in the chamber, the boys with their golden shinty sticks and silver ball, the wolfhound and pups from their mother's flanks, the silk coverlid, and even the satin sheet on which the giant lay, and the newborn babe from the hollow of his right hand. Everything except the wolfhound bitch and the giant still sleeping on his striped bed. Oh, stripped bed, because they stole all his stuff. Finn wrapped the babe in the silken coverlid and laid him in the hollow of the ship, with the hound pups on either side for warmth, and the rowers bent to their oars, and so they drew off from the giant's tower, making all speed on their homeward way. Now the listener had stationed himself in the stern, beside Finn at the steering oar, and they had not gone far when he said, "I hear the giant waking, for he is cold without his bedclothes. He's looking for the babe and the other things, but chiefly he is looking for the babe, and he is angry. He is very angry. Now he is sending the wolfhound after us. Row as hard as you can, for she too is angry." The rowers bent to their oars with redoubled effort, and the ship leapt through the water like a sea swallow that outruns the waves. But before long they saw the wolfhound coming after them, swimming so fast that red sparks sprang up from her muzzle and flanks, and streamed away in her wake. "If she so much as brushes alongside us, she'll set the planking alight," said Finn. "Throw out one of the pups, and maybe she'll be turning aside to save the creature and take it back." So they flung overboard the gray pup, and sure enough, the mother lost all interest in the boat. And seizing the floundering puppy by the scruff of its neck, she turned about and swam back the way she had come, growing smaller and smaller until she disappeared into the distance and the first light of morning. Finn's men rowed till their hearts were like to burst. And after a while, the listener, standing beside Finn in the stern, said, "The hound bitch has got back to the tower. The giant is very angry. He's ordering her to come after us again. I can hear how he rages at her. But she will not come. She will not leave the pup she saved. She's telling him so, as a hound speaks with its ears laid back and teeth bare. Now he has given up trying to send her, and now he is coming after us himself." "Row as you have never rowed before," said Finn. And the rowers sent the ship whistling over the wave tops more swiftly than the west wind itself. But before long they saw the giant coming, and the western waters reaching only a midway up his thighs, and the waves boiling into whirlpools all about him every step. And he came, striding in their wake, for all their desperate struggling at the oars. His stride brought him closer and closer yet. Then Finn put his thumb between his teeth, the thumb which had burned when he was cooking Fintan, the Salmon of Knowledge, and instantly it came to him that the giant was charmed against all weapon wounds save in one place, and that place a mole in the palm of his one remaining hand, and only through the mole could he be slain. Finn told the marksman this, and the marksman said, "If I can catch but a single glimpse of that mole, he's a dead giant." Then the giant reached the stern of the ship, and towering over it like a crag, he reached out to grasp the masthead. And as he opened his hand to do so, the mole on the palm of it showed for one instant, and in that instant, the marksman notched an arrow to his bow and drew and loosed. The arrow spread true to its mark, and with a yell that echoed from the sea to the sky and back again, the giant fell dead. The crash of his fall was like a mountain falling into the sea, and the ship rocked wildly, plunging under them like a startled horse, then righted itself and rode clear. "That was a near thing," said Finn, "and that was a fine shot. Now we'll be turning about and heading back to the giant's tower, for it is not in my mind to leave a good hound or a strong pup masterless in such a place." And so they brought the ship about, and they rowed and sailed back to the giant's tower, And they took the grey pup again, and with him his dam, who seemed now to be no more savage than any other hunting dog. And then, for the last time, they pulled away from the tower and set the galley's head toward the young hero's landing beach and the glen of the hazel woods. They rowed more slowly now, for they were very weary, and there was no longer any pursuit to fear. And it was dawn of the next day when they came into the landing beach. Whew. They ran the boat up the shingle to its place beside the young hero's galley, and went up the glen towards the house, Finn walking ahead with the babe still wrapped in the silken coverlid, the strange crew following with the other two boys, the hound bitch and her puppies, the satin sheet and the golden shinty sticks and the silver ball. The young hero saw them at a distance and came to meet them. But when he saw not only the babe tucked under Finn's arms, but the two boys, he wept for the joy of finding all his sons again, and he hoped only for the return of the last born. He knelt to Finn as though he were Cormac the High King, and begged to know what would seem to the Fenian captain a fitting reward, for all that he owed was Finn's for the taking. "Give me my choice of the two hound pups," said Finn, "for truly I never saw any that showed better promise." Then they all went to the young hero's hall, where a great feast was made ready for them, and they remained with the young hero for a year and a day, hunting or trying their prowess at shinty, and in all manners of sports and pastimes by day, and feasting royally by night. And if the last night's feasting was not the best of all, it was assuredly not the worst, even though the shadow of parting lay over it. And when they sailed for Erin the next day, Finn took with him the brindled and white-breasted hound, now fully grown, while the dam and the other yearling remained with the young hero, who had named him Scolin, which was meant grey dog. Finn called the brindled dog Bran, and he was the first of his two favorite hunting dogs. Whew. Chapter 5. Finn and the Grey Dog. The months went by, and the months went by, and again Finn and his companions went hunting. They had made their kill and were on the point of returning home by Elmu of the White Walls when a stranger came to them. This was a tall youth with hair as barley pale as Finn's, and eyes the color of winter seas. "You will be Finn McCool, captain of the Fianna of Erin," said he, singling out Finn from his fellows, as most people could do so easily enough by his great height, and his air of having the very sun at his feet for a shinty ball. "I am so," said Finn. "And who are you? And where from? And what brings you seeking Finn McCool?" "As to the first, my name would mean nothing to you," said the boy. "As to the second, I am from the east and from the west. My name is known in both places. As to the third, I'm wanting a master to serve for a year and a day. And if I take you into my service, what reward will you demand at the end of the year and a day?" "Only that you come and feast with me in the royal palace of Lochlin," said the boy. Now Lochlin was the homeland of the Vikings, the Sea Raiders, and the chief war task of the Fianna was to keep the coast of Erin safe from their raids and harryings. So Finn knew that this bidding to feast in the royal palace of Lochlin were likely to be a trap. But there was always the chance that it was holding out the hand of friendship. And if that were so, a sore thing it would be to refuse. And Finn was never one to turn from a thing just because it smelled of danger. So he said, "That seems a small enough wage. Serve me well, and I will pay it gladly." So the boy became one of Finn's household, and served him faithfully for a year and a day. And at the end of that time he came to Finn on the level green before the walls of Alnu. "The year is finished, and the day is finished. Have I served you well?" "You have indeed," said Finn. "Then now I claim my wages. Come with me to the royal palace of Lachlan." "Surely I'll come," said Finn. But to his own men he said, "Brothers, if I am not back among you within a year and a day, whet your spears and furbish your war bows to avenge me at the shores of Lachlan." Then he went to the house place to make ready for the journey. His Druth, his jester, sat by the fire, and the tears ran down his long crooked nose and hissed as they fell into the hot ashes. "Ah, now, a fine sort of jester you are," said Finn, thumping him lightly on the shoulder in passing. "You should be making some fine jest to cheer me on my journey." "It's not that I'm feeling like making jests," said the little man, rubbing his shoulder. "Are you sorry that I'm going to Lachlan?" "I am sorry, but though I cannot think of a jest to make you laugh at the outset of your journey, I can give you a piece of good advice to carry you, if you can find room for it." "And what is that?" said Finn. "Take with you Bran's golden chain." "That seems like very strange advice, but I shall take it," said Finn. And so when he set out following the Lachlan boy, Bran's golden chain was bound like a rich belt about his waist. The Lachlan boy led the way, and so swiftly did he cover the ground that for all Finn's long leg, the Finn captain could never overtake him, nor even come nearer to him now than to see him always just disappearing over the next hill. So it was when he came to the coast, to a sheltered bay that he never remembered having seen before, and found a Lachlan galley waiting for him. The boy had gone ahead in another galley and was already far out at sea. For many days they rowed and sailed until they came to the shores of Lachlan and then to the royal palace. And when Finn reached, the boy was sitting at the high table in the king's hall with the king. The king's hall was fine and proud to see, both inside and out. Gilded stag's horns crowned the roof that towered above the lesser roofs of the palace, and within the walls were hung with fine stuffs to keep out the draughts, and encircled with gold and enamel and walrus ivory, the harvest of many raids. Long tables of polished woods, already crowded with the sea warriors and their women, were loaded with food and drink for a feast. Finn entered the hall, still with the galley's crew about him, and since no one came to him with the guest cup, nor bade him come to the high table, he sat himself quietly down on a bench among them, and looked about him warily, and waited for what might happen next. At the high table the Lachlan lords had gathered together. They spoke low-voiced among themselves, glancing often in the direction of Finn, and Finn did not need to put his thumb between his teeth to know that whatever they said, it didn't bode well for him, and he thought, "So I have indeed walked into a trap, and now I must get out of it as best as I may." But the door was shut behind him, and the galley's crew ringed him around. "Hang him," said one noble. "Ah, no, we should have to get a rope and bring it in. while all the while here is the hearth fire already at our hands. Let us burn him to be done with it. Die he must, said a third, an old man with skin burned by sun, and spendthrift and eyes narrowed by gazing into the distance of many seas. But let it be by water. Drowning is a death for a man. And at the moment they rose far off a mournful sound that might have been the cry of a wolf or the howl of a savage and despairing dog. And the Viking lords looked at each other and smiled in their yellow beards. Grey Dog'll do the killing for us. And most willingly, too. Aye, it has been death to many man to go near him since we captured him in that raid of the Glen of the Hazelwoods and brought him to Lachlan. Let us just take the man Finn to Glenmore and leave him there. Grey Dog'll do the rest. Then one of them made a signal to the seamen surrounding Finn, and they caught his arms and twisted them behind him. And struggle as he would, he couldn't get free, for there were too many of them. Though each one by himself he could have broken like a dead stick across his knee. So at last he ceased to struggle and stood quiet, saving himself for a later time. And in the distance, the dog howled again. Now take him to Glenmore and leave him there, said the king of Lachlan. The young prince said, I will come too. It is my year and a day of service that won him here from Erin. And he looked at Finn with pleasure, as a hunter looks at his kill which other men have hunted in vain. And the lords of the high table looked at each other with savage and silent laughter. In the distance, the dog howled a third time. Finn heard it, and his belly knotted itself up under his breastbone. But he thought, if I fight here with the door shut and all these men about me, then I'll be a worse fool than I was for coming here in the first place. Maybe somewhere between here and Glenmore I will be getting my chance. So he stood unresisting while they bound his wrist. Only he tightened all his muscles and made his wrist as thick as might be, so that when he let go, the bonds were slacker than the men who had bound him could possibly have guessed. And as they began to thrust him towards the door, he shouted at the high table, If this is Lachlan faith and Lachlan hospitality, then give me the faith and hospitality of wolves, which is altogether a truer and kindlier thing. Then someone cursed and struck him across the mouth, and he was hustled through the door, which some of them ran to open, and away over the hills in the evening light, with never a chance to break out from among them until they came to Glenmore. Glenmore was a narrow gash among the hills, walled on either side by sheer rock and scree there could be no climbing. And somewhere ahead of them the unearthly howling of Grey Dog echoed back from the rocks, a sound to make the bravest man's hair rise from the back of his neck. In the mouth of the glen they passed a tiny bothy where an old man and wife lived, whose daily task was to feed Grey Dog. But even if they did not approach the terrible creature, but only went each morning to a single hazel tree beside the burn, and flung the lumps of raw meat as far as they could upon the glen from there, and then run back and barricade the door until the sound of snarling and worrying told them that the Grey Dog had come for his food, and the silence afterwards told them that he had gone back into the farther fastness of the glen. The men in charge of Finn urged him on, past the hazel tree, to the place where blood and bits of splintered bone showed where Grey Dog had devoured the whole of a buck flung about him from that day. but his howls that now seemed to echo all about them had not the sound of a creature full fed and contented, but rather of a lost soul in torment and savage with hate for all the world. "And this is far enough for us to be going," said one of the men. "I've no mind to go the way of today's fat buck." "Nor I," said another. "The sooner and the farther we are away from here, the happier I shall be." "A pity it is that we cannot be staying a while to watch," said the prince. Neither you nor us," said the first. "Ah, you would be welcome to stay and watch alone. It's not that we would be, spoiling your pleasures, my young prince. But the king your father might not be best pleased to lose his son, and it is us that would suffer for it." Then Finn heard running feet behind him, growing smaller into the distance, and knew that he was alone, with his hands bound, and the wind blowing up the glen, so that it must carry a scent to Grey Dog. "Well," he said to himself, "there's no climbing out of this place. If I run, the men will kill me. And if, as it seems, I am to die anyway, I'd sooner die from the fangs of this Grey Dog than at the hands of Lachlan men. But the first thing is to get my own hands free." And he made his hands as narrow as might be, and pulled and strained and twisted until the veins of his forehead stood out, and the red blood sprang from his galled wrist, and at last he drug his hands free, and dropped the binding thongs to the ground behind him. And there he stood and waited for the next thing. And then, far upon from the glen, he heard Grey Dog coming, and soon he broke from cover into sight. Then Finn wondered if it would not have been better to run after the Lachlan men and die fighting them with his naked hands. After all, Grey Dog himself seemed no more than a shadow padding down between the rocks, and a snarling and a baying that grew louder every moment. But the breath that came from his snarling muzzle was a flame of fire that scorched and shriveled everything in its path. The blast of it caught Finn while the hound was still afar off, and the skin reddened and blistered and cracked. But he stood his ground, and suddenly remembered the words of the jester beside the hearth fire at Almu of the White Falls. "Take Bran's golden chain with you." And he knew what he must do. He waited until Grey Dog was close upon him, and he could bear the fiery breath no longer, and then he tore the golden chain, already glowing red hot, from about his waist, and shook it toward Grey Dog, as a man shakes the leash towards his hunting dog when he wants him for the chase, or the bridle towards his horse when he wishes him to come to the chariot. Grey Dog stopped in his tracks, and the fire of his breath sank low. Finn shook his chain a second time, and Grey Dog crouched on his belly, his muzzle in his paws, while the flame of his breath died quite away. Finn shook the chain a third time, and Grey Dog cocked his ears, then sprang up and came with his tail waving behind him to lick Finn's burns with a gentle tongue, so healing that the pain went out of them on the instant. Then Finn stopped and fondled his ears as he might have done Bran's, and Grey Dog rubbed and butted his head against Finn's knee. And while doing so, Finn put Bran's golden chain round his neck and said, "Come then, Skellin." And they went down the glen together. And as they came down towards the bothy at the glen foot, the old woman who was standing at the doorway ran in to her husband by the hearth. "Husband! Husband! I've seen such a sight as I never thought I'd see." "And what was that then?" said the old man, not even troubling himself to look up from the straw that he was braiding into a new ox collar. "I've seen that man again, the man who the king's warriors were thrusting in their midst when they passed this way a while back. the tallest and best to look at man that I ever saw. The hair of him like barley under the white sun haze, and the eyes of him gray as a gull's wing, and him coming down the glen with gray dog on a golden chain, pacing at his heels as quiet and friendly as one of our own lop-eared puppies. Then the husband abandoned his ox collar and scrambled to his feet. That must be Finn McCool. For of all the men of Lochland and of Erin, only Finn could tame Grey Dog, and with Bran's golden chain to help him. So they went out to meet Finn, and he came down the glen with Scullin at his heels. Finn greeted them and told them of all that had happened, and asked for a meal and a place to lie down and rest, hidden from his enemies. As to yourself, you're the most welcome to enter, and to share our fire and all that we have, even for a year and a day, said the old man. But as for the dog, Grey Dog, his name is Scullin, Finn said, and he will be no more trouble nor danger to you than any other hound that enters your house. So Finn entered, and Scullin behind him, and there they remained for a year and a day with the old man and his wife, and none of the Lochland nobles knew that Finn was not dead, but laying hidden there. At the end of the year and a day, the old woman was standing on the hillock by her house, and looking towards the sea, she saw a thing that sent her screeching back to the bothy like a hen with the egg stolen from underneath her. There are stranger warboats all along the strand, and a great army landing them from the beach. Who leads them? Said Finn, who was sitting by the hearth, helping the old man by mending a fishing net. A tall, proud man with one eye. By the look of him, I'd say he has no equal for fighting under the stars. That's Gull McMorna, said Finn, and the fighting men he leads are mine, the Fianna of Erin. Don't be afraid, no harm shall come to you. For the year and a day that I have eaten your food and slept safe by your hearth. And whistling Scullin to heel, he strode out to meet his old companions. They raised a great shout at sight of him, and came running up from the shore. But away ahead of them, traveling in long leaps and bound, with his plumed tail flying like a banner behind him, came the great hound Bran. Scullin sprang forth snarling, then checked as the brindled one came up, and they walked round each other stiff-legged, their hackles stirring and half-lifting on the back of their necks. Then Bran gave a deep and joyful bark, and crouched on all four paws, stern in the air like a pup that wants to play. And next instant, he and Scullin were spinning in circles around each other, with yelpings and excited whines, for they were brothers, though they had been parted from each other when they were so young that they suckled on their mom. And they were not as other hounds, but each had a man's heart in them, so that after a few moments of their meeting, they knew their brotherhood to each other. Then both they flung themselves joyfully upon Finn, leaping about him and rearing up to plant their forepaws on his shoulders, licking his face, so that any ordinary man would have been flat on his back before they were finished. But by then the men from the warboats had come up, and there were greetings and rejoicings all around. Here we are come to avenge you, and you are strolling down to meet us, strong and well as though you had feasted every night in your own hall, shouted Goal, with his arms around Finn's mighty shoulders. But the joy of the Fianna turned to anger when Finn told them how he had been received in the King of Lochland's palace, and swords were out all at once, and the men swearing vengeance after all. And the vengeance of the Fianna started at one end of Lochland, and it didn't end until it reached the other. Only the old man and woman in the bothy at the front of Glenmore suffered no harm, and that was how Finn McCool came by the second of his two favorite hunting dogs. Let's see real quick. Okay. It looks like this book has 15 chapters, and we are now at the 6th. So we've come a fair way. We're a little under halfway through. I figure I can keep reading. Chapter 6, The Birth of Oisin. Again, Finn and his companions rode hunting in their homewoods, and as they returned at evening towards Almu and the White Walls, suddenly a young dappled deer spread among from the fern and foxgloves of a little clearing, almost under the nose of Finn's horse, and bounded away into the trees. Finn's companions set up a great burst of hunting cries, and slipped their hounds from their leashes, and the hounds, weary as they were, sprang away to track the fleeing deer, and instantly the whole hunt swept after them, all the weariness of the day forgotten in the music of the hounds and the rush of the horses' speed and the excitement of the new chase. But Finn noticed a strange thing. That however much the doe doubled and twisted in her track, she was drawing steadily nearer to the hill itself. Almost it seemed as though she was trying to reach the place, like one running for sanctuary. But what sanctuary could a deer look for in the din of hunters? On they sped, the doe well ahead, seen and lost among the trees, the hound streaking her trail, the horsemen thundering after. But the doe was as swift as a cloud shadow on a March day, and soon only Finn himself and his 2 great hounds had her in sight, while the rest of the hunt fell further behind, and at last all sounds of them was lost in the wind rustle and bee drone and cuckoo call of the summer woods. Once the doe checked her speed and glanced back as though to see who rode upon her trail, she fled on again with Bran and Skolin close behind her. For a few For a few moments the 3 were lost to view, where the elder and hazel and trees clustered thick among the fringes of the forest. And then, as he crashed out through the undergrowth onto the open moors that surrounded the hill of Almu, Finn came upon the strangest sight he had ever seen. For there, in a little hollow, set about the fern and shadowy with harebells, the doe lay panting from her long run, and Bran and Skolin were standing over her, licking her face and her trembling limbs, as though to tell her she was safe, and had nothing to fear. And while Finn stood staring, and the doe turned her graceful head and looked at him with the soft, long-lashed eyes of her tribe, he heard that the Fionn was hunting horn. Finn heard the Fionn hunting horn, and then the music of the hounds close at hand. The doe sprang to her feet and stood trembling, and instantly Bran and Skolin set themselves on either side of her, their hackles rising as they prepared if need be to fight. Then Finn wheeled his horse across the path of the hunt as they came up, and shouted to the Fianna to call off their hounds. The horsemen reined in, pulling their horses back on their haunches, and seeing what was behind their captain, called off their hounds in a hurry, for they knew Bran and Skolin with their hackles rose like that, and knew that any hound who took up their challenge would be a hound lost. But Gol McMorna looked at the trembling doe and said, "This is a strange quarry that you have us run to." "It is in my mind that she was striving to reach Almu," Finn said, half laughing at the foolishness of his own thought, yet holding it all the same. "And a poor thing it would be if a man were to hunt the guest who seeks his gates." So the hunting party rode on, across the level country and up the hill of Almu. And sure enough, the doe went ahead of them, and she playing with Bran and Scowlin by the way. And when they came to the gates, in she went. And in that evening at supper she lay at Finn's feet, with the two great hounds on either side of her. In the middle of the night, Finn woke up with a start. His sleeping hut was white with moonlight that flooded in through the open door, and standing in the heart of the moonlight, like the gold in the heart of a white flower, was the most beautiful maiden that his eyes had touched upon. She wore a gown of soft saffron wool clasped at the shoulder with yellow gold, and out of it her neck rose white, and her slim bare arms were white, and her hair was so warmly golden that even the moon could not wash the gold out of it. Only her eyes were soft and dark and shadowed, with long black lashes, as the eyes of the doe had been. "Who are you?" said Finn wonderingly, and came to his elbow under the silken coverlid. "And what is it that you're doing here? There are no women of Almu that I've ever seen here." "If you wish for a name to call me by, then call me Saba," said the maiden. "I am the doe that you hunted today." "This is beyond my understanding," said Finn, rubbing his hand across his forehead. Am I dreaming? If so, I hope it's a dream I'll be remembering in the morning." "You'll not be dreaming," the maiden said. "Listen and you shall understand. 3 of your mortal years ago, the dark druid of my own people tried to force his love on me and have me for his wife. And because I would have none of him, he used his magic to put upon me the shape of a doe that I have worn since. But a slave of his, who took pity on me, and who had good cause to hate him, told me that if once I came to Almu, within the white walls of Finn McCool, I should be safe from spells, and my true shape would come to me again. But for long and long I could not come close, for fear of your dogs and hunters, until today I found the chance to let myself be run down by you and no other hunter, and by your dogs Bran and Scowlin, who have enchantment in them, in the hearts of men, and who would know me for what I am, and they would not hurt me." "Here you are safe indeed," Finn said, "and none shall harm or seek to force his love on you, nor bind you with any bond against your will. But can you be happy among mortal folk? And you with never one of your kind to speak with, or touch your hand?" For he knew that her own people, of whom they spoke, were the Donnan people, the proud ones, the fairy kind. "I will tell you at another time. Now it is enough to be safe," said Saba, as she smiled a little. And she turned and went out of the sleeping hut. And as she went, she seemed to take the whiteness of the moonlight with her. So Saba remained in the dun of Almu, and Finn grew to love her, until the day came when he asked her to drink the bride cup with him. And he did not ask lightly, for well he knew the sorrows and hazards that might be in store for a mortal man who takes a bride from the fairy kind. "You asked me once," Saba said, "if I could be happy among mortal folk, with none of my kind to speak with, or to touch my hand. And you said you would tell me another time." And Saba said, "I'll tell you now. I can be happy anywhere in the 3 worlds with you, and not happy anywhere without you. You have done that to me, you who promised that in Almu no one should bind me with any bond against my will." So she became Finn's wife, and their happiness was like the happiness of immortals in the land of youth, where spring never turns to winter, and magic birds sing always in the branches of the white apple tree, whose blossom never falls, even when the apples sweeten and turn gold. The months went by, and they wanted nothing in the world but to be in each other's company. Indeed, as moon followed moon, and summer turned to autumn, and autumn to winter, and back to spring, and Finn seemed to have no taste left for war or hunting or anything that could take him from her side. The Fianna began to mutter among themselves that their captain was not the man he had been before her coming. And the one day word came to the white walls of Almu that the Lachlan warboats were in the bays of Dublin. Sorry about that, folks. I am still getting over being sick, and reading aloud is it is taxing, but I'm enjoying it, and I'm hoping you're enjoying it too. These are neat stories. Then Finn roused himself and called out the Fianna of the five provinces, and in the forecourt of Almu, as in other strongholds through the length and breadth of Erin, the warriors gathered to sharpen sword and spear blade on the tall weapon stone. Saba seemed to grow whiter and thinner as she watched, and once she said to Finn, with her arms around his neck, "Do you need you go? A bargain is a bargain, and pay must be earned," Finn said. "The men of Erin pay us tribute and give us the shelter of their hearths and the food from their store sheds that we keep the shores safe for them from the menace of the sea raiders. And shall we take the tribute and eat from their store sheds and warm ourselves in their homes and not keep the shores safe in return? But need you go," said Saba. And Finn thought, that is the fairy kind speaking. But he said only, "The Fianna of the five provinces do not go into battle without their leader." And then he told her a thing that Gol McMorna once said, "A man lives after his life, but not after his honor," and gently pulled her arms about his neck and went out to see how the armorers were doing. At the very last, with the warriors waiting before the gates, he said, "Wait for me, bird of my heart, and soon we shall be together again. But while I am away, promise me that you shall not step foot outside the walls of Almu, nor speak to anyone not of our household." And Saba promised, and Finn marched away at the head of the Leinster Fianna, toward the great hosting place where the Munster, Meath, Connacht, and Ulster battalions would join him. 7 days they were fighting the sea raiders, and they drove them back from the land and down the shore, and back to their ships, those that were left of their ships, but many a Lachlan man lay dead among the coastwise hills of Erin, and many were left wounded or captive to drag out their days with an iron slave collar around their necks, herding cattle or threshing barley for an Irish master. And many a black warboat staggered home with half her crew, or was left beached on the shores of Dublin Bay for lack of enough men to work the oars. And these the Fianna fired, and left for so many beacons blazing along the shore behind them when they returned home again on the 8th day. With every step on the homeward way, Finn thought more strongly of Saba, and his heart went ahead of him to be with her again. And when they reached the foot of the hill of Almu and began to climb, his gaze went searching to and fro along the ramparts and all along all the possible lookout places for the sight of her waiting for him. But no sight of Saba could he see. And when he came into the forecourt and looked about him, thinking that now surely she would come running, still there was no sign of her, not so much as a glimmer of a single golden hair, and his household hung back, with trouble in their faces. Instead of crowding forward to greet him, and as they usually did, they seemed to find it hard to meet his eyes. And suddenly a cold hand seemed to close on Finn's heart. "Where is Lady Saba?" he demanded. "Is she sick?" Why is she not here to greet me? Then his steward came forward with bent head and told him what he asked. While you were away, Lord of Almu, not even 3 days since, we saw one coming up the hill toward the gate, who seemed in all things, as far as the eye could tell, to be yourself, and with him 2 hounds who had the outward seeming of Bran and Scolin, even to the black hairs on Scolin's tail. And at the same time, we thought we saw you with sounding the hunting horn. Then the Lady Saba, who was waiting from the gatehouse roof, as she had watched every day for your return, cried out sweetly and gladly, and hurried down to where the men were waiting for your coming. We shouted for her to remain within, but truly, it is in my mind that she never heard us, and she was out through the gate like the dart of a swallow, and running down the hill. And then, said Finn in a terrible voice, when she came to him who wore your shape and seeming, she checked and gave a loud, bitter cry, and turned to run back toward the gate. But he struck her with a hazel wand, and there where she had been was a dappled deer, and she was doubling and twisting piteously as still she tried to reach the gate, and the 2 hounds drove her back. We seized our weapons and we ran out to aid her, but when we reached the place, there was nothing to be seen. Neither doe, nor hounds, nor enchanter. Not so much as the shadows of the hill. And suddenly the air was filled with a great rushing, shouts and cries, and the hoof drum of galloping horses, and the baying of hounds. And some of us thought that it came from that direction, and some of us thought it came from that direction, until at last all died away into the wind. We have searched all the country, but there is no trace of her, nor those who hunted her. Oh, my Lord Finn, the Lady Saba is lost to us. Then Finn covered his face with his hands, that no man might see to look on it, and went to his own chamber, speaking no word. All the day and all the next he remained shut away, and no one dared to go near his door. And on the 3rd day he came out, and took up his place in his duties as captain of the Fianna once more. 7 years went by before he rode hunting again, and all that time, whenever he was not with the High King, nor on the war trail against the sea raiders, nor at the summer training, he went searching for Saba, from north to south and from east to west. From coast to coast of Erin he sought her, taking with him no hounds but Bran and Scolin, up every mountain and down every glen, and through the depths of every forest and across the windy heights of every moor. But nowhere did he find any trace of her. And when the 7 years were past, he gave up all hope of finding her again, and began to hunt with the rest of the Fianna as of old. One day they were hunting on Ben Bulben in Sligo, the hounds running far ahead, when he heard the trail music change to a fierce yelping and snarling like a dog fight. He and his companions ran forward. They were hunting on foot that day, for the mountain runs were too deep for the ponies, and found a naked boy standing under a quicken tree, the hounds striving to seize him, all save Bran and Scolin, who with fangs bared and ears laid back, had sprung forward and turned on the rest of the pack to hold them off. Memory smote Finn under the heart, and he remembered another time that he had come upon his 2 great hounds doing this very thing, but then it had been to protect a dappled doe. His men gathered round, beating off the hounds, while the boy stood quite unafraid. looking round from one to another of them. He was tall and well shaped, slight of build, a runner rather than a wrestler, thought Finn, who was used to judging in these matters, and his hair was almost as pale as Finn's, so that his dark eyes seemed all the more dark by contrast. He stood like a wild thing, tensed and light on his feet, yet still proudly unafraid. Who are you? Finn asked. The boy looked at him, but spoke no word. What is your name? Where do you come from? Still the boy said no word, and suddenly Keelta Macaronin said, It's no good to ask him, don't you see? He knows only the wild. He doesn't understand what we're saying. So Finn held out his open right hand to the boy, slowly and reassuringly, so that he might understand there was no harm in it. The boy looked from his face and his outstretched hand and back again. Come, said Finn, as he might have said to a hound puppy he was training, knowing that the pup would not know the meaning of the word, but his voice speaking it would mean something all the same. And slowly the boy came and sat his hand in Finn's. So they returned to Almu with their strange boy in their midst, and all the way Finn watched him, as though some great question was in his mind, and the boy was the answer. At first he was like a wild creature in a cage. Everything was strange to him. Clothes chafed and hampered him after running naked all his life, so he pulled off breeks and shirts again and again and threw them away. He did not know how to eat among men, and would snatch his food and take it under the table with the hounds. But little by little he grew less wild, more used to the ways of men. He began to be able to guess what people meant when they spoke to him, though sometimes he guessed wrong. And brought Gall McMorna an apple when the old warrior had asked to scratch the gadfly bite between his shoulder blades, or came willingly to untie the strings of Finn's hunting shoes for him when the captain had only said that the nights were growing colder. At last, hesitating and stumbling on the outset, he began to gain the power of human speech. And when speech came easily enough for him for storytelling, it was a strange story he had to tell to Finn, sitting between Bran and Skolin at the captain's feet one winter night when the wind, howling like a wolf pack, was at the door. Ever since he could remember, he had lived with a dappled doe. He supposed she was his mother, for he had no other. He didn't know his father, as far as he knew, and she had given him milk when she was small, and the warmth of her own body curled about him when the nights were cold, and comfort when he was hurt or unhappy, and love and gentleness at all times. They had lived in a green and beautiful valley, from which he was not quite sure how or why there seemed no way out. But he supposed there must have been. After all, assuredly there was. But he never found it. And this he knew because he lived on nuts and berries in summer, and winter food was left for him daily in a certain cave on the hillside. And also because a man came to him at times, a very tall, dark man, at whose comings he sometimes had been troubled and afraid. Sometimes the man spoke to the doe, his mother, in tones that were darkly sweet as heather honey, sometimes in a voice hard with menace. But always the doe shrank away and would not even look at him, until at last he went off again, angry. And then there came a day when the dark stranger spoke with his mother for a very long time, sometimes pleadingly and gently, sometimes urgently, as though they were playing within him, sometimes raging like a cold gale through the woods of winter. But still she would do nothing but shrink away with him, and keeping him always between him and the boy. At last the man gave up pleading and threatening alike, and did a thing that the boy had never seen him do before. He lifted up the hazel wand which he always carried in his hand and struck her with it, and then turned instantly and strode away. At this time the doe followed him, trembling and seeming as though she strove to draw back, but following still. Then the boy was terribly afraid, and called out to his mother not to leave him, but when he would run after her, his feet seemed to have taken root in the ground, and his mother looked back at him piteously, and great tears fell from her eyes. Yet still she followed a dark man, as though he drew her after her on a chain. Then, still struggling to follow her, crying out in rage and terror and desolation, the boy fell to the ground into a blackness that was like sleep, but not like good sleep. When he awoke from the blackness, he was lying on the bare heather slopes of Ben Bulben, and he was alone. For days he hung upon the slopes of the mountains, seeking and seeking for his hidden valley, and never finding it, until at last the Fionn hunting dogs found him. So Finn knew that he would never find Saba again, but he knew that she had left him a son. He called this boy Oisin, which meant little fawn, and he grew up to become one of the greatest champions of the Fianna. But always there was a strangeness about him, for he was of the fairy kind on his mother's side, and famous warrior that he became, he was still more famous for the songs that he made and the strange and wonderful stories that he told from his mother's side. He had the gift of minstrelsy, and he could sing a bird out of an arbutus tree, or the morning star down from the skirts of the sunrise. By the story of Saba and the dark druid, he could not give an end to. No one knows the end of that story to this day. Ugh. Let's see now. We've been doing this for almost 2 hours. I'm at chapter 7 now. 7, and there's... what was it? 15 chapters? Yep, 15 chapters. We are halfway through. It's almost 6 o'clock. Tell you what, everybody. I'll leave off there because, you know, we're halfway through the story. And the next time I stream, I'll read some more of the story, maybe even finish it. And, you know, we'll have a good time doing so. I have to admit, these are neat stories. They really are. I kind of want to learn how to set up, because I have like a webcam. I kind of want to go through after I'm done reading just to show you some of the illustrations in this book. Because this book has some absolutely beautiful pencil-drawn illustrations. They're gorgeous. I'd love to show them to you. But, you know, that's a little bit of the story of Finn McCool and the Fianna and his exploits. I have to admit, I think there's actually potential for like another storyteller to make stories about his wife and like Finn's attempts to find her and, you know, things like that. I think that would be a really cool thing to explore. I gotta admit, I had a lot of fun reading. But, I am getting hungry and thirsty, and I think that it's a good place to stop. So next time, we'll continue learning the exploits of Finn McCool. And I hope you guys all had a great time. I really do love stories. I really do. Thank you, everybody, and look forward to part 2.